Today I want to share with you 10 things that I gave up after 50. Now before I do, there's a book called Good to Great. It was written by, I think his name was Jim Collins. But he talked about in that book how many people have a to-do list. But he said that we also need to make a stop doing list. Do you have a stop doing list? Here are 10 things that I put on my stop doing list after 50. And the first one was holding on to hurt. You know, it's interesting on how people can hurt us, and we can carry on to that hurt for many years. You know, I remember reading a story about a man who was walking through the wilderness, and he was bit by a rattlesnake. And he went and tried to find that rattlesnake to get revenge. But what he forgot is that while he was seeking revenge, poison was going through his system. Wouldn't it have been wiser to just stop and get that poison out first? And see, unforgiveness and bitterness is like a poison that can just ruin us. And I know many people who they're just bitter. And I just want to encourage you to put on your stop doing list holding on to bitterness and hurt. Now, the next thing that I gave up was living in the past. Now, when I was younger, man, I had vision, I had dreams, I lived out of my imagination, but I've noticed that the older I've gotten, it's easy to live out of your memory instead of your imagination. It's easy to lose your dream. And I've learned that I need to intentionally set aside time to focus on dreams. You know, the Bible says, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Guys, God has a dream and a plan for your life, even if you're over 50. You know, I have a mentor of mine that shared with me that in his job, a lot of the things he did was focus on problems. So he set aside time each week to focus on vision. In other words, he would think about, where am I going? What does God want to accomplish through me? And that's what I want to encourage you to do. You know, Martin Luther King Jr. said, I have a dream. Do you? Are you living out of your memory or your imagination? The older we get, the easier it is to live in our past and forget that God has a great plan for our future. Now, the next thing I gave up was trying to be someone other than I am. And guys, I've struggled with this my whole life. I've always wanted to be someone other than I am. I'm a very introverted person, and I look at people who are really extroverted, and I think, well, why can't I be more extroverted like them? But you know, I've talked to some of those people, and they've asked, well, why can't I be more like the introverts, more thoughtful, good listeners? The point is we can spend a lot of our life trying to be someone who we're not. I read a quote once that said, stress is who you think you should be. Relaxation is who you are. I have a mentor of mine that says it this way, I'm on a journey to be me. And he talks about when he was a young pastor, he was at the altar and he said, Lord, make me into another Billy Graham. And God said to him, I'm not going to do that. I already have a Billy Graham. I don't want you to be another Billy Graham. I want you to be you. You know, we can spend so much of our lives trying to be who we're not. And that's one of the things that I stopped doing after I turned 50 is I stopped trying to be someone other than I am. Now, here's another thing. I stopped expecting perfection. So back in 2002, I went through a severe depression. I almost quit the ministry. There were times when it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon and I was still in bed. I didn't want to get up and face the day. And during that time, I had a friend of mine call me. And he basically gave me a sermon. And at the time, I didn't want to hear it. And I'm just like, it goes in one ear and out the other. But you know, after we hung up, I thought about what he said. And it was true. And what he was talking to me about was unrealistic expectations. And that was me. I had unrealistic expectations for the ministry. And that's what I want to encourage you to think about today. Do you have unrealistic expectations? I had a counselor once say to me, expect reality. Reality is that we live in a fallen, broken world and bad things happen. But the good news is that no matter what we go through, Jesus is with us. So I would have you just think a moment, are your expectations realistic? Today we're talking about not just having a to-do list, but a stop doing list. Now, another thing I gave up is the illusion of control. When I was younger, I just felt like I had a lot more control than I actually did. And the reality of life is that, we have a lot less control than we think we do. One of the ways I do this is by praying the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity. Now notice, it's trusting God to give you serenity and peace and joy. God, grant us serenity as we're on this walk today. To accept the things we cannot change. Think about the things you cannot change. You cannot change the past. You cannot change other people. You cannot change a lot of times what happens to you. But guys, those are the things that I often focus on, and I'm wondering why I'm so stressed out. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can. Now, what are the things you can control? Mainly yourself, your attitude, your response. I read the other day that life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond. Our response is our responsibility. So it's giving up the illusion of control. And notice that word illusion. We think we have a lot more control than we actually do. But this is where the sovereignty of God comes in. And this is one of my favorite doctrines, is the sovereignty of God. I love the verse, be still and know that I am God. God's got it under control. Philip Yancey said, faith is trusting in advance what will make sense in reverse. God has got it under control. Now, another thing I gave up is comparing myself to others. I did this a lot in my younger years. It was constantly comparing myself to others. And you know what? That's a sin. God did not create you to be like someone else. God created you to be you. I heard someone say it this way. Whenever you compare yourself to others, you will find people you're doing better than, and that'll lead to pride. You'll also find people who are doing better than you, and that'll lead to discouragement. Either way, you're dead in the water. So quit comparing yourself to others. Now, guys, if you want to compare, here's the best comparison. Am I better today than I was yesterday? Am I growing? My motto is progress, not perfection. Now, the next thing I gave up was exercising for vanity. When I was younger, I exercised because I wanted to look good. But now I exercise because I want to finish well. Someone has said that our body is an instrument, not an ornament. Now think about it. God uses your body to do his will on this earth. You and I are the hands and feet of Jesus. And the better we take care of ourselves, the longer, in general, not always, but in general, we will be able to serve God. And, I've heard it said that health is your greatest wealth. And I've seen this as I've gotten older. I've seen, the consequences of either taking care of yourself or not taking care of yourself. A role model for me is my 93-year-old dad, who is just, amazing in how he's taken care of himself and the quality of life he's had, even in his later years. You know, I learned the other day that you can be more productive in your 80s than in your 30s mentally because of your experience. So I just want to encourage you to set a goal of taking care of yourself, because you are the instrument that God wants to use, and you have so much to share. And the longer or the better you take care of yourself in general, the longer you'll have to serve God. Now, the next thing that I gave up was the Messiah complex. Now, what is that? It's basically thinking I'm the Messiah. It's basically thinking that I can fix and change other people. You know, there's a ministry called Stephen Ministry, and they say, we're the caregivers, but God is the cure giver. And sometimes I just fell in the trap of thinking I was the cure giver, that I could fix and change other people. What I've realized now is it's God that does the fixing and the changing. And you know, the less I try to control people, the more I can enjoy people. Who are you trying to fix and control and change? Is there a way that you're thinking you're the Messiah? You know, I love that verse. Be still and know that I am God. He's God and we are not. Now, the next thing I gave up was people pleasing. Now, I am a recovering people pleaser. I like when people are happy. I don't like controversy. I don't like stirring the pot. But one of the things that I've learned is that if you want to do nothing in life, try to please people, right? Because no matter what you do, someone is going to be unhappy. In my early years of leadership, the Lord showed me that I could be either a taxi cab leader or a bus leader. Now, what is a taxi cab leader? Well, people get in the taxi and say, I want to go this way. You say, okay, I'll go this way. Well, then the next person says, I want to go that way. And I go that way. And what I learned is that you just can't do that. So I've tried to become more of like a bus leader. If you think about a bus, on the top of the bus, it'll say, hey, we're going to this destination. If you want to get on board, join us. So I've gave up people pleasing. And I've learned that really the only person I have to please is the Lord. Lord, help me to live for an audience of one. That is my new prayer. Well, today we're talking about not just having a to-do list, but having a stop doing list. And the final thing that I have put on my stop doing list is chasing success. I think in the early years, it's about climbing the ladder. It's about being successful. But as I've reached my 50s, it's now more about significance. It's about giving back. You know, Bob Buford wrote a book called Halftime. And the analogy is that the first part of your life, ages 1 to 40, is kind of like the first half of a football game. You're focused on success. And then around age 40, 45, you go into what's called halftime. Now, some people call this a midlife crisis, but it's a time when you just kind of evaluate the first half, and then you think about, how do I want to live my second half? And when you're in your 50s, you're in the second half of your life. And I think what you learn is that, hey, it's about giving back. It's about making a difference, not so much making a dollar. It's about influencing people for Jesus. And that's what I want to encourage you to do. You have experiences. You've taken some shots in life. If you're over 50, you've went through some hard times. And God has allowed you to go through those things to help others. Don't waste your hurt, someone said. They are your credentials for helping others. Well, hey, I read a while back that your 50s can be your happiest decade. And that's what I'm hoping for you, is that your 50s are your most meaningful decade. I think that if you put some of these things on your stop doing list, it'll help you to have a great second half. Well, thanks for joining me today. May you love God and may you love your neighbor as yourself.